No, it's 4 to 6. Is it 5 to 6 or 4 to 6?
No, it's 5 to 6.
Thank you.
Sorry. Something is genuinely wrong with the justice system in this country when it allows people who have committed violent crime, once they've committed a sentence, to go free when they've done it multiple times, and then consequently we get people dying when people who have committed violent crimes go free again and are able to just essentially be free in society and end up killing people. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to make it very clear at the very start of this debate that it happens in New Zealand, and it has happened in New Zealand, that we've allowed violent criminals free after they've committed extremely violent crimes and had very light sentences, and they have ended up killing people. And the statistic, I believe, is that if the 3 strikes policy had been implemented earlier, is that 80 people who have died would otherwise be alive. And we say that even one life is too many in this kind of situation to be balanced off against some concept of rights that is overinflated to begin with. And we say that for this reason, the 3 strikes bill is a very good policy to be introduced in this country, and the 3 strikes bill is something that we absolutely support. We've got 5 points actually to be made on the affirmative side of the House, and I'm going to talk about 3 of them. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the balance of life against other possible rights that might accrue here. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the public faith in the justice system. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about the fact that these criminals actually do deserve this. Louis at second is going to talk to you a bit more about victims' rights and about deterrence, which we think are also significant reasons to have this policy. So firstly, life itself and why life is very important. We say that we don't need to make a clear argument as to why saving lives and stopping people from violence is important. We think that that's fairly clear. However, we say that if the negative team in this debate wants to get up and talk about any other conception of rights, they have to remember that it's being balanced off against the potential of life here. And we say that what this policy does and is essentially protect life and protect people from extreme violence. We say that in the past, in New Zealand, you have an unfortunate scenario where in a judicial system or in a court-based system, a judge is in a position where they can't necessarily take into account what has happened in the past or a trend that we see in broader society. A lawyer's not going to be able to get up and say, look, people like this man have been let out before and he's ended up killing people. Instead, they have to treat it on certain circumstances, and judges will end up taking into account perhaps sympathy with a victim, because a lawyer will almost always make those sorts of arguments. And you'll get scenarios where judges are actually getting light sentences, and we see that this actually is happening in New Zealand, and that's why people are getting significantly lower sentences than the public believes that they should be, and why people are only getting put away for 5 years when they've committed very violent acts, when they're likely to commit them again, and then they go out and commit violent crimes. So we say on this side of the House that if a few people who aren't likely to recommit after they've committed 3 violent crimes already, which we say is highly likely, we say that if a few people like that do get locked up for longer than they are supposed to, that balances off against the lives that we'll be saving and the violence to people that we'll be saving, and we think that that is worth it, because we say that even one life is too many. But secondly, we say that it's very important to have public faith in a justice system. And we say that when you get someone committing multiple violent acts, and obviously with the 3 strikes bill, it's 3 violent crimes, if they're not getting life, if they're not getting 25 years in prison, people aren't going to be too pleased with that, because that's not upholding what they see as what criminals deserve, and they don't feel protected. We say that this is bad, that this is important for a number of reasons. Firstly, we say that obviously it's part of the government's responsibility to not only just protect people, but make them feel protected, and we say that is something that the government needs to be doing. We see that as a general application, if people have faith in the justice system, that it's working, that it's carrying out what they want to do, they're actually more likely to buy into that justice system and more likely to, in fact, obey perhaps marginal laws that they question in the first place. We also say that the government actually needs to represent the will of the people and represent democratically what the people want. We say that a justice system is an important branch of government. We say that therefore, if it's not actually upholding public faith in the justice system, by having a bill such as this, it's extremely important to do that. And we say that when people commit multiple violent crimes, that it is actually necessary to put them away for life, for 25 years, in order to do that. So we say that it's extremely important to have public faith, to uphold public faith in the justice system, which this will do. But thirdly, we say that actually criminals do deserve this. And we say that it's very important to understand here that we're talking about people that have committed multiple violent acts. The Three Strikes Bill is 25 years for, I think the worst one is, or the lightest one is something like aggravated assault or armed robbery. When people commit multiple violent acts, ladies and gentlemen, it's not an accident. It's something that they've done. And we say that this isn't going to be some kind of retrospective rule, right? We say that somebody's not going to accidentally commit a third act when they don't know what the law is. A person is going to know that once they've committed 2 violent crimes, if they commit a third one, then that's it. We would say on this side of the house that therefore they're likely to take into account that and likely to obviously try even harder not to commit a violent crime if it's been somehow accidental in the first place. But we say that if you're going to commit a third violent crime in the situation where you're going to get 25 years in prison, it's likely to be very well prepared, it's likely to be very intentional, and we say that that means that effectively these criminals are going to deserve it, and you're never going to get a scenario where a criminal, or very rarely are you going to get a scenario where a criminal is committing a violent act out of accident or accidentally, or when it's not serious. It's going to be extremely serious, and we say that it's perfectly justified, therefore, to actually place a harsher punishment on a criminal for doing essentially the same act as somebody else in this scenario. We think that it's perfectly fine to take into account greater trends. Our justice system already does that. We say that it's perfectly fine for a criminal to be getting punished when it's clear that there's a pattern of violent behaviour. So for these reasons, ladies and gentlemen, we absolutely support the Three Strikes Bill.
Thanks, Alec. First negative, Kieran. Just make sure you do that figure on the screen too.
Ladies and gentlemen, when you start putting such absurd and ridiculous arbitrary boundaries on the justice system, a justice system that is designed to be responsive to the nature of the crime, you start to undermine the very essence of that justice system. We on the negative have 4 main arguments for you today, and I'm going to be introducing all of them. Before doing that, I'm going to deal with 3 points of rebuttal along the line of what the first affirmative said. So firstly, our first affirmative speaker had got up and told you that life is really important, and it's really important that we protect people's lives. Yes. Yeah, life's really important. It's really important we protect people's lives. But in order for this point to stand on their side at all, they have to prove that their system actually does lead to a safe society. They need to get the causal link that this does lead to a safe society. Simply quoting a now disproved statistic that 80 people would now be in jail who would have committed violent crime does not qualify as a proving of why this happens. And furthermore than that, we also recognise that the criminals themselves have a life, which you are taking away from them. We recognise this cost is minor compared to if they're killing someone, but in isolation, this cost is something. So we see a cost with no benefit in the system. So second on to whether it would build more public faith into the justice system. So the public faith in the justice system can derive from a whole lot of characteristics. It derives from the justice system working effectively, and that means like effective policing and people being forced. But it also derives from a justice system that people are able to relate to. It derives from a justice system that people feel like they can understand. That justice system is trial by judge and trial by jury. And the reason people can relate to that is they can see that a judge and a jury can consider each case in isolation and make a judgment on that case in isolation, rather than simply an arbitrary line that you have to cross. And actually they get their faith in the justice system not because there's an arbitrary line, but because they can see that this justice system can be responsive, it can adjust to individual circumstances. And thirdly, on the point of whether these criminals deserve it. So first what we heard here is these criminals deserve this greater sentence they're going to get. Now, firstly, if they deserve it, they are already going to get this sentence from their judge. That is the role of an experienced judge. I'll get on to that in my substantive. But furthermore than that, something very interesting the other team said, when they stood up and said, but the crime they're committing third is often really bad. The crime they're committing is really bad under the Three Strikes law. And yet, that's absolutely true. When you introduce a three strikes law, the incentive for a criminal to commit a worse crime is far greater than it is to commit a lesser crime. Because if I'm a criminal, and if there's someone who's a criminal on 2 crimes, right, and they're going to commit a third violent crime, currently, if there was no three strikes law, that crime is weighed like any other crime. So the disincentive to commit a violent crime is the same. Under the three strikes law, there's no disincentive on them not to commit a really horrible crime, because the punishment they're going to get is going to be very similar. Because their third crime will automatically send them to jail, they have no disincentive not to commit a really vicious and nasty crime, which the affirmative team was talking about. Now, firstly, now to the 4 points of substantive. So firstly, we see we already have a mechanism which deals with criminals. We have a mechanism, and that's the judge's discretion. And the reason that's really important is judges are able to understand the criminal far more than an arbitrary piece of policy could. The judge is able to see the situation of the criminal. They're often very experienced in lots of crime, so they can judge each case in isolation. And in doing that, they actually lead to fairer sentencing, where they will see why someone has committed serial crime, if there is someone committing serial crime, and if they can see there's a risk of them committing other crime. So that they still can put people away who they believe will go out into society and commit crime, but they can judge those who have committed 3 crimes and decide actually they're not going to. They're perfectly experienced to be able to do that. So secondly, our system doesn't actually lead to a great disincentive, right? So there is a very, very marginal effect of disincentive. We're not going to deny this. The putting a three strikes law has marginally disincentivized people from committing 3 crimes. But by the time you're dealing with someone who is committing 3 violent crimes, how effective do you think the disincentives are? We already have plenty of disincentives to stop people committing violent crimes. And those are like prison sentences, right? So how effective do you think this marginal increase of disincentive is going to be on these people who have already ignored all the other disincentives? I don't think it's very much effect. And furthermore than that, the people we're going to see put in under this are going to be the poorer people, the people who are shunned more by society, the most ostracized, the most lacking in the ability to comprehend the justice system and comprehend the disincentive. They're going to be least affected by the disincentive because the background they come from is going to be lower than those of other people. I'll talk about that just more. Now, on to our third point, is why this is bad for the rehabilitation of criminals. So firstly what we see, simply the longer you put someone in prison, the less easy it is going to be to rehabilitate. We recognise that a prison sentence is necessary to take people out of society and give them an opportunity to rehabilitate. But that prison sentence should be tailored to what the judge sees the criminal needs. And that's the important thing. With this arbitrary long period in prison, this is actually harmful to their rehabilitation because they're spending longer in prison amongst criminals, learning criminal ways in prison, out of society, losing how they are meant to behave in society than they do at the moment. And furthermore than that, with this kind of arbitrary line, they feel less involved in the justice system, so a criminal is going to feel less linked and less slightly disenfranchised in the justice system when they see their thing is just simply an arbitrary qualification that they have now been sent to jail. And this is going to lead them less likely to rehabilitate because they feel more cheated through the justice system. So finally, the fourth point is why this leads to a lack of political will. So this is, as we've already said throughout this, basically a surface solution, right? Because the people who are committing these 3 crimes obviously have a serious problem because they're committing 3 violent crimes which already have high disincentives. So all this allows the government to do is simply put on a surface solution saying, hey, we've got a 3 strikes policy, we're dealing with violent crime. But this doesn't work, and now it means they no longer have to actually deal with what's causing the violent crime. So this harms political activity because people see and look around and go, oh, I've got a 3 strikes policy, violent crime is fixed. But it's not. And because of that, it's actively harmful to our attempts to tackle violent crime. So because this is unfair, we have sufficient mechanisms to deal with this, and this is actively harmful for attempts to violent crime. We are very, very happy to negate it.
Alright, thanks, Kieran. No, thanks. I'd like to welcome the second ab speaker, Louis. Oh, do I have
like
to keep
You're all
restarting
like
this
9
speed?
feet tall, so
Oh, this is
yeah,
fine.
that'll be really good. If you were
Okay.
though.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, we told you that people are dying, and we told you that there are people killing those people who are dying. Therefore, if those people who are committing crimes are locked up for longer periods, it's pretty clear that in jail they're not going to be out there stabbing people. It's not enough for Kieran to come here and throw around wishy-washy concepts about public faith and about lack of political will, when we've brought a tangible benefit right now, which is preventing the loss of life. What I'm going to do for you today is briefly deal with this faith in the justice system point and the idea that judges have an absolute ability to know all in the area of sentencing. Then I'm going to get on to what Kieran didn't do, which is talk about the concrete benefits which actually flow. Firstly, the issue of faith in the justice system. Our conception of the justice system is simple. People have a role in convicting, and they have a role in demanding that certain standards are followed, and so there are obligations on judges apart from giving judges an absolute discretion. The narrative from the negative team goes like this: judges can see the circumstances of the case, therefore they should have absolute discretion. 4 responses to that. The first of these is that's empirically not true. Limits are placed on judges all the time. We put maximum sentencing requirements on judges. We say 20 years or less, or a fine of $20,000 or more, which automatically put constraints on the judges. Kieran, have you heard of the Sentencing Act 2006? That puts limits on judges. Secondly though, the argument that judges are doing an okay job at the moment, so that's why we can impinge on them. But in terms of should we? Yes, we should, because judges just aren't convicting people. At the moment, judges are not putting in place heavy sentences. The reason for this could be that they're adequately tailoring it to the circumstances. Or it could be that judges have become so desensitised to seeing violent crime that they don't realise the importance of punishing people. Judges are flawed in their ability to conduct the calculus because while they see the person there who's pleading mitigating factors, they don't think of the potential for future harm to see. What Parliament was able to do is make an empirical assessment on the harms that were occurring to people and the damage which was occurring, and as a result of that decide that there were benefits in immediately punishing people. The justice system has consistently set its face against that because it's a rights-based system. It doesn't look at consequences and long-term empirical analyses, so instead they say rights of the victim, rights of the accused, let's balance that out and give them a low sentence. The very calculus they're making leaves them unable to think about long-term consequences. They won't go into those policy decisions. Because they won't look at the policy decisions, they can't exercise their discretion properly. They're limited to rights-based analysis and they simply don't protect victims. Thirdly though, we say that this gives the judges a spur in the right direction. So what it does is it gives a strong indicator to judges of how to carry out sentencing and the fact that they're not doing enough currently. It overrides the lack of exercising discretion at the moment, does that in a good direction. So that's why judges are failing and why we have to intervene. Let's get concrete. First, we say we do protect people. Obvious reasons. There are killers, killers spend more time in jail, less people die. Thank you. That's all we need to say on that, Kieran. Secondly, Kieran's argument that rehabilitation is a better system. His argument went like this: people get less involved with the justice system, you know, they feel really bad about it when they get imprisoned. The problem is, we agree completely, but we don't agree when people have committed 3 serious crimes. Those type of people aren't the type of people who rehabilitation works for. We're very happy to rehabilitate the fuck out of them for the first and second crimes they commit. But when it comes to their third crime, they're so ingrained in their offending that they're no longer able to pull themselves out of it. In fact, Kieran agreed with this. Kieran said to us, these people are really poor. These poor people don't know anything, therefore they always commit crimes. They're ingrained offenders. Exactly, Kieran. That's why we need to lock them up. The very socio-economic arguments that Kieran brought up, that they're lower decile, ingrained offenders, that's why they need to be locked up for long periods, because you can't rehabilitate them. Yes, it's sad that they're poor, they come from bad communities, and therefore they're committing lots of crimes, but that's deeply ingrained. Kieran's analysis on why deterrence won't work relies upon it being deeply ingrained. So that's why rehabilitation fails, Kieran. Finally, deterrence. We're proud to say that this will deter people, and I'll give you 4 concrete reasons why. The first of these is that amongst a broad range of offenders, often these serious offences happen in groups, in gang situations. What these offences do is give an individual something to say, I'm going to bow out of this because if I commit this crime, that will be my third strike and there will be a serious punishment. So what it does, it gives the person an additional reason when they're in a peer pressure or gang situation to actually say, no, I can't step into this. And because of that, they're able to use that sort of as a almost levy against the people who are trying to pressure them. Secondly though, we say that this is a concrete increase in the scale of offences. So at the point where people are about to commit a third crime, and suddenly they've become desensitised to the punishments. The first two crimes, they've become a bit more used to it, they're adjusted to that offending. But when you've got a third increase in scale, it brings in an added stick which operates over and above the penalties which they're having currently. Thirdly, when people are being back on track, if there's a bit of a re-offending buzz and maybe they're thinking about going back and stealing something from a store and stabbing someone, this gives that extra little incentive not to. So for people who are getting back on the right path, again it operates. And finally, I'd like to underpin all these points with our conception, because our conception is simple, that people here are making choices to commit crime, and that where somebody has committed numerous offences, in fact that person is aware of the consequences and needs an extra stick to operate. Finally, Kieran's point about lack of political will, completely weak because it assumes it won't work. If we can prove it works, as we have, then political will goes up and everybody's happy. We love politics. Great. Ladies and gentlemen, proud to propose.
The model the affirmative team want us to follow in the debate is that of the United States, where essentially the worst criminals get killed and gone. So, and apparently, according to the logic of the affirmative team, that would just mean, America's like a really safe place to live, and there's no violent crimes at all. But we say the fact of saying that these people are criminals and ostracizing them from society further increases the incentive on these people to actually commit further crime when they when these people are put away. And that was the point we made in rehabilitation, because they just want to talk about crime in the short run, like the short-term crime, but we want to talk about the intergenerational causes of crime and the fact that crime exists in the long run. I've got two questions. Who is better at sentencing criminals, judges or Rodney Hyde? The second question is, under which model do we have better incentives to reduce crime? So to the first question, who is better at deciding criminal sentences, Rodney Hyde or judges? Okay, judges act in these cases all the time, so they have a level of expertise to know exactly what kind of treatments work for criminals and what kinds don't. Their response was but there are limits on judges. There's maximum and minimum sentencing. Yeah, so what? The point is that there's still a range at which the judge can decide how long that person should be in prison for. And exactly, there is minimum sentencing already. So you don't necessarily need the 3 strikes policy if you want to have longer sentences. You can just have a minimum sentence for each crime, what already exists. That's what we support on the side of the House, the status quo. And in addition, there's still accountability mechanisms that act on a judge, right? For example, if the judge makes a bad decision, then they'll see that and be criticised for it within the legal community. Whereas Rodney Hyde or Parliament just relies on voters voting at an election on all sorts of issues. We say judges are far more directly accountable in the fact that's the only decision they make. To win this point about safety, what they had to prove is that
these criminals will never, ever rehabilitate. But we just think that that's wrong, and I'll get to that in my point on rehabilitation, to say that once these people are in there for 25 years, so what they had to prove, right, is that there is absolutely no chance of rehabilitating them, right? Like, because if they're away for like 25 years, you had to prove some link that they could just never be rehabilitated. And I'll get to your weak analysis about like ingrained crime in a sec. But the second point within this, the status quo and why it works, is kind of the incentives operating on criminals. So on the one hand, Louis wanted to say these people will always commit crime, but on the other hand, he wanted to say they do respond to marginal incentives. But we gave you two pieces of clear analysis as to why this will not act as any extra disincentive. And why in fact it can be the opposite. So we said firstly there's a perverse incentive in the fact that there's an incentive to commit a nastier crime because you're always going to get the same blanket sentence, right? Like if you're going to be put away for 25 years, regardless of what you're going to do, you, instead of just like punching the shop owner, you might as well kill them, because what's the difference? The second thing we told you as to why it wouldn't act as a marginal disincentive is because we said the life of criminals is already really bad, and so what that means is that the opportunity cost of going to prison is low, right? So there's like if you live in a mansion in Auckland, you're far less likely to want to go to you're not going to want to go to prison because there's such a big gap there. But whereas when you are living in the slums on the benefit, then there's a lower disincentive to go into prison in the first place. So let's get on to this point about rehabilitation. And their analysis here was that you can never like rehabilitate anyone. Like people aren't don't have a genetic thing which is they're a criminal, right? The reason they commit crime is because they are products of their environment. And what rehabilitation does is it provides you the opportunity to alter the environment. Their policy is really harmful for that. Why? Because when you put someone in prison, they are more likely for very long sentences. They're more likely to to not rehabilitate, and that's basically for two reasons. The first reason is that you're always living with criminals, so you're constantly interacting in an environment where you commit crime to get to the top of the tree. But the more sophisticated analysis that Kieran brought you is the fact that the reason people commit crimes in the first place is because they feel ostracized from society. What happens when you put these people in prison? They become further ostracized from society for longer. But that means that, sure, they may not commit a crime because they're sitting in prison, but all the people around them who are also committing crime and still in the communities have no disincentive. In addition, like their children, and intergenerational crime, which goes on, is just not dealt with because of the fact you're continuing to put a systematic group. That's why in America, right, you have lots of blacks in prison, but you also still have lots of blacks out in the community who are committing crime, because of the fact there's a connection between who they see in prison, and blacks are like, the state treats us really unfairly, so what's the cost of us going out and killing some white guy? That's exactly why we say intergenerational crime continues. And so if you want to like hinge your analysis on number of lives like killed, we say that over like the long run, we save much more lives. I'm going to fourthly address this point of political will, because they don't understand it. The point is, right, that politicians like have a limited number of policies or resources which they can implement in a certain year. And we say that they do have to cover this issue of crime, but when you allow them to get away with making some like slogan into policy, they can just be like, look, we've dealt with crime, like we've done the 3 strikes. That prevents deeper investigation into the actual root causes of crime, which is surely going to be more significant than just saying, Rodney Hyde's, public policy is 3 strikes because it wins votes. We oppose.
Thank you, Paul. Really good. Now what is this? It's 2, 3.
What? 2 to 3. Yep.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Right. Am I okay to start?
Oh yeah, whenever you like.
Excellent. Cool. The affirmative team's safe paradise is the United States of America. That place with the really low crime rates. That place with the really, really good way of dealing with crime. And that's the problem with the affirmative team's case. There have been 2 major issues in the debate. Firstly, we've had the question of who is best to decide on sentencing criminals. Is it a judge or is it an arbitrary policy? And secondly, we've had for the safety of society, and which will lead to the better safety to wider society. So firstly, under who is best to decide, we gave you a good analysis of why judges are in the best position to decide. And it's in fact because they're exposed to all this crime the affirmative team talked about that they are in the best position to decide, because they have the most experience of what crime is actually like within society. But they still do have a range within which they work, and that's right, the affirmative stood up and said they do have sentencing boundaries, we have that range. But clearly there's a difference between a range and an arbitrary three strikes policy, where the judge has no choice but to put them in prison for 25 years of their life. There's clearly a difference there. And finally, judges are also directly accountable to their effects, because what the judge's decision they make is reviewed all the time by other judges. The judges have this accountability to lead to them. The second point in this debate was the safety of wider society. Now, it is an absolute truism for the affirmative team to stand up and say that locking people up will prevent that person from committing crime. But what we're doing on the negative team is we're looking at the bigger picture. We're moving beyond that single individual. You're right, they can't commit a crime. They're in a box. They can't do it. But we need to look at wider society, who else is committing crimes within that wider society, and what the effects of that are on the individual. So, because we see that those people you're locking up commit a worse crime before they're locked up. And that's the problem that's been underlying their case with their statistic of 80 people. Is that statistic was calculated before the three strikes policy was put in place. So there's no similar statistic to the level of crime committed by people who would now be put under the three strikes policy, and how much worse that crime would be. But secondly, you'll see rehabilitation is harder, because the long arbitrary sentences make it hard to rehabilitate that individual. But furthermore than that, as my second speaker nicely analysed, we see that it also affects the intergenerational effects of crime. When people see that the state is rejecting them, when people see that their father and all their family have been in crime, they're far less likely to be able to be rehabilitated. They're far more likely to end up in a life in crime. The good example of this was the blacks in the United States of America. But finally, there's this point about political will. Now, this is something the affirmative team clearly doesn't really understand. But what it is that people, the politicians have a limited ability to have effects on society. Politicians have a limited ability to propose change. If they propose this surface change, it limits their ability to propose other change. Because if they've said, we've sorted violent crime, we've got it done, we put the three strikes laws in, they have no way of building momentum for actually sorting violent crime, doing something to actually improve the safety of our society. So for all those reasons, we were very, very happy to negate. Yes.
Very well. We might do a debate. I'll speak to Alec about it.
They were having a debate on Saturday.
Oh, really?
I was quite keen to go.
What, Saturday?
Well, I think we have a session where actually like there's more people.
You mean not Saturday, but the next Saturday? I was thinking also, Alec, we could have like a round of practices before Bluff on Tuesday. Because we need to do a video accreditation for Chain at some stage as well.
Are we doing that?
Well, I don't think we've got time to go. Like, yeah, I mean, like, I just haven't had time to go.
Thanks very much. Let me know those.
And you have to
Thanks, Kieran.
credit three different, like, we have to get three supers from different campuses to see three different facts.
Yeah, we can talk about it after, and by Tuesday will we know whether Gabby can speak or not.
Yeah, we should have.
Yeah.
I've seen 6 to his time.
Any time you like.
Ladies and gentlemen, the affirmative team today isn't trying to create America. We're not relaxing gun laws and abolishing welfare. We're simply saying that if you have a violent person in a prison for 25 years instead of 12 years, that's 13 more years in which they can't commit violent crime. So we say that immediately is going to reduce the amount of violent crime that's occurring in our society. And unless the negative, and we say that the negative team in today's debate rests solely on the idea that rehabilitation is going to save more lives. And we say that they need a 100% rehabilitation rate because we have a 100% non-crime rate while people are in prison. And for that reason, we say that what we're going to do is going to work. So firstly, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to talk to you about why it is that judges can't make a decision. Then I'm going to talk to you about rehabilitation, and briefly I'm going to touch on these points about deterrence and public faith after that. So firstly, judges, the reason why judges currently fail is because they can't consider wider policy implications of what they're doing. They can only consider individual rights-based things in their, when they're making decisions about sentencing. We say that when they get up and try and rebut us on the basis that we have a sentencing act, that's only a reason why we can restrain judges. The reason why we should restrain judges is because they're not the ones that can consider whether or not people are going to go and commit crime. They're not the ones that can consider wider trends in terms of whether or not we put people of what we're doing with violent criminals that are repeat offenders. They don't consider those sorts of things. They can only consider individual rights bases, and that's what Louis said at second. And that's something that hasn't been responded to by the negative side of the House. So we say that it's absolutely fine for us to restrict judges in this way. But secondly, so then on to the second point about rehabilitation. So I want to first of all blow out of the water this idea that, look, if we put a person in prison, all of their friends and family are going to start committing crime as well. Ladies and gentlemen, these are violent criminals. They're going to go to prison regardless, right? They're going to go to prison and it's either going to be for like 12 or 15 years or 25 years. So whatever they're saying about lots and lots of people, other people committing crime, it's going to happen regardless because people are going to go to prison here anyway. And we say that they've already been to prison because they've already been committing violent crimes in the first place. So we say that this entire point about rehabilitation isn't about whether or not this is going to cause more people to commit crime. It rests solely on the idea that these people can be rehabilitated or they will be rehabilitated. We say that you're never going to get a 100% rehabilitation rate. We say that you are going to get a 100% non-crime rate if people are in prison, so you're going to stop people dying through that. So finally, there's smaller points about deterrence. First of all, I'm going to say that deterrence doesn't actually conflict with the rehabilitation thing that we said, because when you have a situation of a 3 strikes bill, it's going to deter the marginal cases, the people who aren't psychopaths. But the people who are psychopaths, we definitely want to put them in prison. And the reason the people who aren't psychopaths, as Louis said, the ones that are in gang situations where there's pressures operating on them, and if there's a 3 strikes bill, they have a greater way to get out of that. But finally, this point about political will, because they've said that, you know what, if you implement a thing like this, it's just going to mean that it ruins political will to do anything about violent crime. We say that actually our policy works, therefore we don't actually have to think that much more about violent crime because it actually is going to help. But secondly, we say that this isn't going to take away all accountability measures for politicians in terms of acting on violent crime. If there's still violent crime, there's still going to be like groups that are ramping out statistics and telling us about it. There's still going to be an opposition in government to say you need to do more things as well as this. But we say that this is going to help, and we say therefore that we should implement the policy.
Well, since we've got an